That's a wrap on the Bengals 2024 NFL Draft. Let's recap everything that happened as the Bengals added college players this weekend.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien. The draft is in the books, and we've got several more episodes, but one recap episode for you here to cap off the weekend. We're on the Locked On Podcast Network, of course, here on Locked On Bengals, and you can find us on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. If you're new to the show, you can subscribe to stay up to date with all things Bengals leading into the 2024 regular season. We'll have draft content for you to wrap up this draft part of the offseason for a while here until it's time to move on to what's next as the offseason program will continue. And James, the Bengals kept all their picks, which maybe is the biggest surprise. I don't know. Jermaine Burton might still take that cake, but certainly one of the biggest surprises is keeping all 10 picks for the Bengals. No movement at all.
It's why when we did our predictive mock, I wanted to keep it at 10. I thought the Bengals were willing to be aggressive. I also thought there were scenarios, especially early, they'd want to trade down. But everyone was saying, oh, they're going to trade some of these picks. And just knowing how the Bengals operate, I would have leaned towards that way. Of course, that was the favorite, to them trade some of these. And I think they were willing to. I really do. Mm-hmm. But once we got past the first couple rounds and their guy, Chris Jenkins, who was, I think, their second target in the second round, realistically, behind Johnny Newton. Once they get him, and then clearly they were ecstatic about Jermaine Burton and McKinley Jackson falls to them, and they were targeting. Like there was just never a time where the board wasn't falling the way they had hoped or predicted. And so I don't think they've gotten to that Cam Taylor-Britt area where it was like, a few years ago where he was the last corner in that bucket. And they just never felt that way. Even with Chris Jenkins, they had some backup defensive tackles that they would have targeted there. So yeah, I think that's why, but it is a bit surprising because some of these guys aren't going to make the team. And I wonder who it is, but you're not getting 10 guys on the team, and it's going to make it that much harder for some of these college free agents to surprise and push it too. And that's hard enough for them to do. So I think it is a surprise of the weekend. I would put the Burton pick as a bigger surprise, but that is a surprise for sure.
I could see a path actually to all 10 guys making the team. Although Erick All might make it as a pup list player.
That doesn't count
at first. It doesn't count?
Doesn't count. No.
So Erick All doesn't make the team because he's on the pup list?
Well, if he starts on the pup list, then Tanner McLachlan makes the team. Tanner McLachlan isn't making the team if Erick All isn't on the pup list. You're not keeping five tight ends.
I could see it. Yeah. I talked myself into that being a possibility this
five tight ends.
Going three running backs, going light at safety with Dax still playing corner. But maybe if Dax is just playing corner, they'll not go light at safety.
They're light at safeties, 4 safeties.
Yeah. That's one less safety than last year.
Yeah, that's not light at safety. That's normal.
I can see a path to these guys making the roster. A tight end is probably the hardest because I think that Tanner Hudson showed enough last season to keep his job. But if they think that, Tanner McLachlan can do those things in the receiving game, I think Tanner McLachlan could push Tanner Hudson. Tanner Hudson is making the veteran minimum. But,
where's Dejon Anthony? How's Dejon Anthony making the team?
Fourth safety.
Okay, so Tyson Anderson's just gone. Tyson Anderson is a better prospect than Dejon Anthony.
Yeah, for sure. But I don't know why you make that pick if there's not, unless he's just a practice squatter that's going to be a special teams player for you. I think that I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. That could say something about where Tyson Anderson is in their eyes.
Nah, Tyson's fine, health wise. So, he's coming back from the AC, but he's fine. He's going to be ready. There's no reason he wouldn't. But anyways, we're going down a rabbit hole here. It is a surprise that they kept all 10. And maybe they do make it, to your point. But I think a lot of what we thought they would do, they did. They wanted the versatile receiver with some explosion. They wanted to add trenches, and that's what they did. I mean, look at this. Offensive tackle, defensive tackle, wide receiver, defensive tackle, tight end. Those are their first 5 picks. Weapons, trenches. They go to cornerback with Josh Newton, and then boom, weapons, trenches. In fact, there's only 2 non-trench or weapons picks, 0 linebackers, 1 corner, 1 safety. I mean, that's the weapons, trenches. We've spent a lot of time talking about one or the other, and they invested in it. Now, some surprises for sure. No running back. I think that's a bit of a surprise. No interior lineman until the 7th round. That's a surprise. Or no second offensive lineman until the 7th round. You have the 2 bookends in Amarius Mims and Matt Lee, and that's it as far as offensive line goes. So I do think that that's interesting as well.
Yeah, and waiting until the last pick was like, man, you and I were talking about it, and I asked the question on yesterday's show, like, are we sure they're prioritizing? I said this in our post day 2 episode. Are we sure they're prioritizing interior offensive line for day 3? Or is that just something we think they should do, where we think they need depth? And they did need a center of the future, and we'll get into Matt Lee later. That might be my favorite pick today, although you can make some arguments for a few of the guys they picked today.
I will.
But the overall, some overall themes of this draft class that I think are very interesting, and we touched on some of these yesterday. Film over data class in a lot of ways. A lot of these guys are film picks, and I think that's especially true for, Jermaine Burton, McKinley Jackson, Erick All, probably also Tanner McLachlan. Josh Newton, the corner they took in the 5th round, had a lot of hype coming into the season. He was seen as a first-round corner at the start of the 2023 college football season by
he was
Dane
24th
Brugler,
on Dane. Yeah, 24th, I believe, on Dane's board.
and by Trevor Sikkema, who saw him as a first-round player going into the season. But the season didn't go the way that it needed to go for him. And another big theme is guys they have visits with. And we didn't have all of these tracked, but we had a lot of them tracked. We might actually have the full list of 30 visits for the Bengals this year because of information we found out because they drafted those guys. But Amarius Mims, Chris Jenkins, Jermaine Burton, McKinley Jackson, Erick All, Tanner McLachlan, and Dijon Anthony, I believe, were all part of the Bengals official 30 visits where those guys came into Cincinnati for visits. They also had at least a virtual meeting with Josh Newton. They met with Cedric Johnson, the edge rusher out of Ole Miss, at the Combine, and they sent their defensive line coach to his pro day. And they had presence at the Miami pro day, but I'm not sure exactly what the extent of the contact with Matt Lee was before the Combine. So not a surprise, but more of the top 30 or 30 visit players drafted by the Bengals than I think we've ever known, because that's what, 8 of the 10? No, sorry, 7 of the 10 picks, guys they had in-person meetings with in Cincinnati.
In the first 5. The first 5. It's wild. And when we get into it, like with Erick All, that's someone I don't think we did. Did we? We didn't go with All, did we?
No, we had discussed All. We actually, also a correction yesterday. I thought that we had McKinley Jackson. We did not have McKinley Jackson, I don't think, in the final mock, but we talked about it.
Well, yeah, we've talked about all these guys for the most part. There are a couple that we didn't. I think the only one we didn't really talk about that they picked was Josh Newton. We didn't really talk about Josh.
I don't know if Cedric Johnson or Matt Lee ever came up either.
I think Matt Lee did. I think you're right about Cedric Johnson. So 8 out of the 10.
Yeah, most of these guys were on our radar, at least. Somehow.
Matt Lee did for sure. Like, it's just like a quick, like late round, like athletics. Anyway, we'll get into him. But yeah, this year, in what's going to suck about this is next year we're going to read so much into the visits. Like, remember the visits in the draft is going to go the completely other way. Remember, there was the Senior Bowl year, and then there was, so that's going to be the case. As they're meeting with, man. I want to get into day 3 though, because there is a lot to get into. There's other draft nuggets that we're going to have all week long. So we're just getting heated up here. Don't go anywhere. Let's get into day 3 coming up next.
Today's episode of Locked On Bengals is sponsored by FanDuel. The NFL draft is behind us. We don't have NFL draft props to talk about anymore, but never worry, because FanDuel has you covered for well, anything going on in sports, whether it's the playoffs in the NBA or the NHL, or you're into those 15 and 12, I think, at the time of recording, Cincinnati Reds and Ellie De La Cruz is charged toward a potential MVP. You might get good odds there. FanDuel is a place to place your bet. And if you're a new customer with FanDuel, you'll get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed $150 in bonus bucks, win or lose. You can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks on an app that is safe, secure, and extremely easy to use. So if you're waiting for it, you don't have to wait any longer. Go to FanDuel.com/locked-on and make your first bet an automatic win, or check out the app. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook.
Today's show is also brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is where you need to go right now. Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Maybe you're in Cincinnati and you want to make your way down to Indianapolis for the NBA postseason, and you decide to do it the day of the game. Well, Gametime has last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the lowest price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. And it's not just the NBA, it's Reds tickets as well. Maybe you're hanging at the banks, you decide you want to go on over to Great American Ballpark. Well, Gametime is the app to have downloaded to your phone so you can save up to 60% on last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. So download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
Let's get into some day 3 picks, James. We've got it summarized on the bullets for all of you watching on YouTube, but if you're not, they go with 2 tight ends after missing on tight end, to Bengals fans' frustration for a couple of years. They get 2 on day 3 this year, both of whom have unique and individual upside and traits that we can talk about, and interesting paths for both of them. They do draft a corner, as we expected. Not necessarily one that I had on my radar for the Bengals, but clearly one that they liked in Josh Newton, who I mentioned was seen as a first-round corner going into the year, and then didn't quite have the year that he was hoping for, with 2 particularly rough games against Texas and Colorado that I think got a lot of attention. And then he didn't test like an elite athlete, which is why it was surprising, because the Bengals have been drafting more athletic corners lately. They go with an edge rusher in Cedric Johnson, a versatile defensive back in Dijon Anthony to double dip at Ole Miss. There's your school double dip this year, coming in back-to-back picks at the back of the draft, and Cedric Johnson and Dijon Anthony from Ole Miss, and finish things up with Matt Lee, who might have been my favorite pick today, James. But let's start at the top with Erick All in those tight ends.
Yeah, that's my favorite pick of the day, is Erick All. I was in on Erick All. My BengalsTalk.com mock had Erick All, and it was because I did buy into the visits. I think they left no stone unturned with Erick All, and it's because you look at the talent and you look at NFL evaluators, and I think Louis Riddick had something really good on Erick All, that the Bengals found their George Kittle if he can stay healthy. And I'm not going to go that far, right? I'm not. I don't think those should be the expectations. But when you're talking about tight end, especially in this year's class, taking the upside swing on the guy that when he's healthy is the 6'4", 250-pound guy that can be dynamic as a route runner, can make plays in the passing game, can also block at a high level, can be the complete tight end that James Casey wants, the Bengals tight ends coach, that the Bengals have coveted. That's what they want. They don't want just guys that can catch or guys that can just block. It's just hard to find them. And so a guy like Erick All that had a serious back injury, recovered from that after having an operation that again was pretty serious, transferred to Iowa after being a captain at Michigan, and was productive before he tore his ACL in October. It was like showed, I can play. And so I'm in. I think it makes sense. He is a Fairfield alum, so he's a Cincinnati native, staying home. And so that's cool, but I'm in on the player. And you know why else I'm in on the player? I was already in, and I thought it was worth the risk at this stage of the draft. I think when former teammates speak really highly of you, that matters. And Chris Jenkins, I got the opportunity to meet Chris Jenkins today, and he was in the media room and we're chatting with him. And he's like, and we got Erick, and his face just beaming, excited. He's like, that dude is a beast. And so, of course, health is an issue. It's the fourth round. Fourth rounders miss all the time. At least we know the talent is there with a guy like Erick All. And so it is a big swing for sure. There's multiple big swing picks in this draft. That's the other big takeaway.
Yep.
It's a big swing, but man, if it pays off, they could get a heck of a player.
This is a real ceiling pick, much like Jermaine Burton was a real ceiling pick, much like Amarius Mims is a ceiling pick for different reasons, for all of them. And for Erick All, it's clearly just an injury thing. When he was on the field in Michigan and he was healthy, he was productive. He was the leading receiver for Iowa despite missing half the season last year. That means two things. One, Iowa's offense is putrid. Two, Erick All can produce in a putrid Iowa offense, and nobody stepped up in the other 7 games he missed to take that receiving title. He was the leading receiver. I mean, that's crazy. And you're right when you mentioned that it's a film pick. I think that on film, this is a guy that has the potential to be a do-it-all tight end. If he's healthy for his final year at Iowa, he might be the second tight end drafted. I think Zach Taylor said something similar where they didn't think there's any chance they're getting him if he was healthy in his final year, and probably didn't have the back thing as well, because I'm sure some teams might have taken him off the board. I noticed that All said in his meeting with the media after he was picked that his back is all good now, but he is rehabbing, of course, from that October, I think, October 2023 ACL injury. So when he's on the field, athletic, good receiving ability, good route running ability. I know draft guy, Bengals draft scout Joel, who we met when we were in Cincinnati, when I was in Cincinnati back in the Thursday night Jags game in 2021, however long ago that was.
21.
21. He's really high on Erick All's tape, thinks he's probably the best Bengals tight end in terms of ability to beat man coverage since Tyler Eifert. And I know that he watched a lot of Erick All. And so another pick that, like McKinley Jackson, like Jermaine Burton, like Amarius Mims, while there are holes in those profiles for this reason or that reason, whether it's inexperience, whether it's off-field stuff, whether it's injury, the tape and the flashes for all of these players, and we talked about this yesterday as well, shows high-end talent. And if they can rein that in and hit it consistently, then you have a bunch of potential starters there in those 5 players to start the draft. The only thing to couch that statement is that it's a big if. A lot kind of has to go right here, and there is risk with these picks, but the upside for each of them, I think, is that you have a solid contributing or starting player for your football team, and that is something the Bengals needed. They just took a pretty risky approach to try to get there.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think if you're taking someone like that, you got to leave no stone unturned. And I don't think they left any stone unturned. They were comfortable with the medicals. Obviously, they love the player. And so we'll see. But there's a lot to like. I do think character-wise, he's got it. Was a captain at Michigan. Checks that captain box as well. And if you're playing tight end at Michigan and then you're going to Iowa, transferring to Iowa and playing tight end there and the dude there, like he's got it. So hopefully the Bengals can get it out of him. We'll see if he can start the season healthy, if he starts the year on pup, all of those things.
Yeah. If there are any helmets you're allowed to scout, it's Iowa tight ends, where, just last year we saw Sam Laporta be the leading contributor in an offense that sucked and be awesome. So Erick All has that similarity, not comping him to Sam Laporta, to be clear, but Iowa tight ends. I think that's a helmet that's a little bit fair to scout.
Lewis Riddick said George Kittle. So, comp him to whoever you want. If we're going that far, you might as well go that far. And who knows? The Bengals are going for it all with Erick All. Dad joke. Up next, we'll get to the rest of the Bengals day 3 picks. And Jake wants to talk about Matt Lee. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with your friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get, from unique stickers that you can trade with a friend to complete albums for prizes, cool new playing pieces and to play, travel boards, and hilarious emojis for taunting friends as well. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win and rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover on Monopoly Go. So get off the bench right now and get it on your phone and go download it for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on.
Got some more draft picks to talk about here, James. We can jump to Matt Lee. Want to quickly give some. Well, I guess we've talked about Josh Newton. Do you have anything else on Josh Newton that you would like to add? I know he had a very entertaining call with you guys.
He did, and Mike Petraglia doesn't know who Kobe Bryant is, clearly, which Josh Newton just let him know. I had to put out just that part of the call. I think Josh Newton is a dog.
You mean
I don't know
former
that yet.
Cornerback Kobe Bryant?
Yeah, and people mention that, but clearly Josh Newton isn't worried about that guy. You know, he's thinking about Kobe.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think not much to add. Versatile defensive back. We'll see if he can play outside. I think they'll give him a shot there and then go from there. But I like him. There's a lot to like. But, yeah, let's move on, Taylor, because we're going to have time to talk about these guys. But Tanner McLachlan out of Arizona. This is a value pick by Zach Taylor. He said it himself where I'm sitting, one seat over about an hour ago. They like what he can do in the passing game. Obviously, he's an older prospect. They watched him a lot, and they think that he can contribute. And I do think that this is your Erick All insurance, where if All starts the year on the pup, then McLachlan, like we talked about, can be that fourth tight end, even though you think they're going to keep 52 tight ends.
Well, I have a hard time thinking that either of these guys are going to get cut unless they fall on their face. And there might be like that normal NFL transition for tight ends, right? But Tanner McLachlan was the first pick for the Bengals that we were tracking that was a consensus value pick, where, you know, Josh Newton's consensus ranking was 149. He was picked 149. Chris Jenkins was like 52. He was picked 49. Amarius Mims was 20 and a half. He was picked 18. So all of those are like equal value. And then McKinley Jackson, according to consensus, was a reach. Erick All, according to consensus, was a reach because of those injuries and which team was going to take that risk. But Tanner McLachlan, the first big value consensus, 165 and picked by the Bengals at 194. So was seen by, I think, Dane Brugler and PFF as potential, or no, Dane Brugler and Lance, or maybe just Dane. Now I can't remember and shouldn't have opened my mouth, but as a fourth, fifth round player, I believe, and the Bengals get him in the sixth. The athletic upside is there. And James, he is the Canadian that the Bengals end up drafting after also talking with Quantez Stiggers, who ends up going to the Jets as a CFL prospect. Tanner McLachlan's path took him from Canada to Utah State, or Southern Utah, and then Arizona, where he finally started producing when he finally got to a real football program. So there's some refinement needed in his game because of the path he took, starting with playing football in Canada, playing at a small school in the United States, didn't get that development time, and maybe just isn't the most fluid of athletes, but is a player that can probably contribute for you, I think, in the passing game if he has the opportunity. But as a sixth-round pick, he does have a bit of a harder path to the roster than Erick All, if Erick All is healthy. They come back with another value player in terms of consensus rankings, being Cedric Johnson, 153 or 154 on the consensus board, 215 for the Bengals in the draft with their compensatory sixth-round pick, and a guy that didn't necessarily tick all the production boxes and kind of looked like he was going to be an ascending player at Ole Miss in his first 2 years, starting as a true freshman and ascending as a true sophomore, and then just didn't really produce more after that, but is a freaky athlete. And that's why his consensus rating is higher. This is a moldable player, the youngest player the Bengals picked on day 3 at just 21 and a half years old. And with the athletic traits he has, he was a 93 percentile athlete. You're looking to develop that athleticism into a pass rushing threat if you can.
For sure. And this is one of those guys, Joseph Osai, in the last year of his contract, you look at it and you're like, all right, it would be nice to hit on one of these day 3 edge rushers, and can he just be a contributor? Can you mold him into a contributor? He's got the profile that you're looking for, the SEC background. He did produce early, like you mentioned. He is really athletic. And so hopefully they can get something out of him. And it was picked 214, by the way, just so the commenters don't get you. But nevertheless,
my bad.
Nevertheless, typo where?
In the sheet that I'm reading from.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was like, you're bad. I'm not reading from a sheet. I was like, where's the 214? But yeah, I like it. I think it makes sense. We talked about edge rusher. By the way, this doesn't mean that Trey isn't playing. Trey's playing. This isn't Trey Hendrickson's replacement. This just might be the guy that has a role if Joseph Osai goes elsewhere after this year, because he's in a contract year. That went quick. Anyways, Dejon Anthony, who was the next pick, someone we've talked about a few times. I think it's special teams for certainly. I think he's got a shot at competing in that nickel spot. Safety gives them some depth there as well. If Tyson Anderson can't go, if they realize Dax is going to be a full-time corner forever, whatever the case is, I think that's what he brings. And clearly they liked him because they met with him and kicked the tires on him. And I assume they think he can help on special teams, and then either nickel / safety / nickel.
A 5th, 6th round grade from the Beast and Dane Brugler, who says he projects best as a nickel defender who can work underneath and overlap responsibilities in the secondary. And you look at what he did as the second straight Ole Miss pick for the Bengals. He played all over the place in the secondary. He played safety, he played in the slot, he played a couple years outside before he moved to safety a little bit more in his last year. And that could be because of his speed and his ability to stick it outside corner, and wanted to improve his versatility a little bit to give himself a shot in the NFL. But another player that you can see the role for the Bengals. When we saw this visit, we thought it was probably a special teams driven visit because they're so stacked on the roster as safety, but I'm sure he'll be in the competition with the rest of the guys at the back of that room to try to find his way onto the roster. One of the harder paths to the roster, along with McLaughlin potentially, or one of these tight ends if they're all healthy, just in terms of the competition. But you're right. My favorite pick potentially of day 3 is Matt Lee. We were waiting all day and all draft for the Bengals to find an interior line prospect. And honestly, when we were talking about this leading up to the draft, we were thinking about a guy with a little bit of positional versatility. Matt Lee is probably just a center in the NFL. He kind of struggles to stay at 300 pounds. He was 288 pounds at the East-West Shrine game, got up to 301 for the combine, I believe, and then ran a 5:05.40 with an extra 13 pounds of weight potentially on, which is a pretty impressive feat, to be honest, to add weight for the weigh-in and still move that quickly. This is an athletic center. So the Bengals have added 2 athletic offensive linemen, which I love. The pass pro tape and grading and productivity are great for this guy. And the only question, the reason he falls this far is I think because of size. And even then, from a consensus to where we had him perspective, that's value. And you go look at Brandon Thorne's ratings. I think Brandon Thorne had him as a 4th rounder. So while this is the last pick of the draft for the Bengals, I tweeted this, James, that's a top 100 player on our board. He was 99th on our board, the highest graded player the Bengals drafted by our overall scores that weigh in some analytics and film into the equation since Jermaine Burton, who was a 70, Matt Lee coming in at a 73.6. So in fact, a little bit higher ranked even than Jermaine Burton ended up, with the analytic factors included there. So when I see this pick, I see potential center of the future that the Bengals nabbed with their last pick in the draft. And when you're talking about adding 2 athletic offensive linemen, something we've been begging the Bengals to do for years. I know he's a little undersized, but he has experience with inside zone and duo stuff, as Brandon Thorne has pointed out. That's a very exciting pick for me. And I truly think center of the future should win a roster spot immediately this year.
Well, yeah, he's going to beat out Trey Hill. Trey Hill's officially on.
Absolutely.
That's what this is. Now, after that, who knows? He's got to develop and show that he can and all of those things. But yeah, I think that's the new favorite for backup center this year, which either beat out Trey Hill or say it's Max Sharping's replacement. But yeah, I think one of the surprises was they waited. Matt Lee was someone, if they had taken him where McLaughlin went, so their first 6th round pick, 194, I would not have been shocked if they had taken him there. I wouldn't have said anything about it. I'd have been like, yeah, there you go. There's your interior. There's your center. And so to get him here, it is their best value pick by far, which is easier to do because it's the latest. Of course, I get it. But I was surprised that he fell that far. And maybe that they knew that they had a feel for where NFL teams felt where he was going to go if he was going to go. And so that's why they let it happen that way. But yeah, I mean, if they had taken him literally 43 picks earlier, I wouldn't have blinked at all. And I would have been like, yeah, that's about right. That's still pretty good value, I think. So to get him where they did, I get why it's your favorite pick. And I think you're right that from the athleticism standpoint, it is nice, isn't it? To get two athletes and on the interior, that's okay. Like Tanner Bortolini, the guy I liked out of Wisconsin, he wasn't the heaviest guy in the world, but he could move. And the thing I like about Matt Lee, certainly not the heaviest guy in the world. He can move. We know he's athletic. Good note on him gaining weight and still running that well. So he's able to stay athletic, even though he's moving or even though he's gaining weight. But the pass protection part of it, Dane Brugler described him as boring. He's a boring pass protector because he just never gets beat. Sign me up for that. That's what I want to hear. And so, yeah, hell yeah. It's a heck of a pick.
We'll have some priority free agent notes for you as we get those officialized later this week. But the most notable one that I saw early here, James, is the Bengals did reportedly sign or agree to terms with Texas Tech punter Austin McNamara. And we're not going to spend a ton of time here because we're pushing our time limit already, but bringing in punting competition for Brad Robbins after the draft, after there was some speculation the Bengals would add a punter, I thought that was worth noting. He was PFF's third highest graded punter in college football last year, coming in right ahead of Ryan Reckow, and had a solid hang time average over 4 seconds, was one of the better net punters in the country in college football. So some competition there for Brad Robbins.
Yep, not shocked. This would be a fourth predictive. We didn't mock a punter. We thought they were going to go this route. And so, or third, if we're going with our predictive. Either way, we nailed this. Now, we didn't say McNamara. We didn't know which one would make it there. But I always strongly felt like they were like, all right, we're not using another draft pick on a punter. We're just not this year. We're going to find one. We're going to get one. Because if you're a free agent punter, where do you want to go? You want to come here after what Brad did last year. And so game on. Brad knows competition's coming, by the way. So this is exactly what should happen. Who knows? Austin, Brad, there we go. Let the games begin, because that's going to be something we're talking about during training camp, baby.
Had a fringe draftable grade from Dane Brugler, who had Torrey Taylor, the Iowa punter, with a 4th round grade.
Isn't that where he went? I'm pretty sure he went in the 4th round.
Was that the punter that got picked? I honestly tuned it out.
Oh yeah.
So Austin McNamara with a fringe draftable grade, 7th round, a PFA grade from Dane Brugler there to wrap up our coverage.
Did you say you wanted the punter over Erick All? What's wrong with you, Jake?
Huh?
Why would you say that? I didn't want that punter over Erick All in the 4th round.
Oh, I see what you're doing. That's going to do it for our coverage of the 2024 NFL draft. We'll have more in terms of
grades,
grading, in terms of thoughts on this draft. We might have some guests come on to tell you what they think of this draft. We're hopeful to talk to some folks with the Bengals as well on the podcast. We'll see when we can get those scheduled. So plenty more on the draft coming your way for the next week, but that's going to do it for the draft weekend. Until next time, we're back on Monday night. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.